Hello, everyone, and welcome for this to the evening tonight, where we have three really great urban speakers who I'll briefly introduce. In the middle, we have Isaac Crosby, along with his nephew Aidan and sister Myra. They run the Crosby Gittigan, a Black and Indigenous family farm. Isaac, Myra, and Aidan are graduates of the first TUFT course. At the far end, we have Jer Campbell, who is a queer artist, outdoor educator, and plant lover, and a graduate again of the first TUFT program. They're here to tell us about Jer's Garden, an interesting community farm model focused on small plots, skill sharing, and community building. And lastly, but not least, we have Sylvia Chang, founder of Growing Takaranto Floristry, a queer BIPOC-owned urban flower farm committed to regenerative and anti-oppression practices. And I'm not. And now I'm handing it over to Cy.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, James, for introducing our panel today. So we've heard a little bit about them from James, but it's really just a tiny bit. So if anyone would like to start to briefly just tell us about your business. And I think we have slides to go with that as well. So who would like to go first?
I'll go.
Leave it to the seniors.
Go be a senior. Wait a minute. Ooh, no, even. Wait a minute. Do I introduce myself?
Yeah.
All right. So let's starting with me. My name's Isaac Crosby. I am part of Crosby Get Again, which is my sister and my nephew. So my sister Myra and my nephew Aidan. For me, I've been doing urban agriculture in the city of Toronto for quite a while. But I've only was introduced to the how do I say this? The urban agriculture community in the past 10 years. So Crosby Get Again, we are at Melbourne Farm. It's our first year there. If you do the next slide. So our slogan is where how you grow matters. So our whole idea is to you see right there, that's Aidan, my sister Myra in the middle, and me at the side. So that's Crosby Get Again, the part of it behind us. So for us, it's all about teaching our Indigenous roots, our Indigenous agricultural techniques. Go to the next slide, please. You can see in these slides the beginnings. This is the first slide, our very first day at the farm. This is what it looked like. And our first thought was, wow, okay. What did I get my hands into? Because it's in a corridor, so it's very, very heavy clay soil. You don't really notice until you get there. You have your boots on, you step in the clay soil, and you're just okay. Yeah, I'm in it. Yep, I'm in it now. So that's what it looked like in the beginning. That's the start. Then go to the next slide, please. So this is basically the redesign. How to redesign and think of how did we want to do this garden? The person before it, like they had their first one. Our next one was to do rows and to showcase mounds as well. So to show the row ground gardening and mound gardening that goes with clay pot irrigation. Next slide, please. So this is the mid-season. Things are growing, things are popping. So those in the front, you see the corn growing for the mounds. I have my sunroom at the back, and you have the bamboo that's holding up for the pole beans. You name it, I grew it this year. Strawberries, blueberries, huckleberries, white corn, red corn, popcorn, squashes all over the place. Every kind of bean you can think of, and sunchokes and ground nuts and horseradish and I just grew it all. Next slide, please. So now it's harvest time. So this is near the end of the season. So you see the transformation from the garden, from the farm site that we had. So the corn, you see nice and tall, the proving corn's nice and tall. Everything is nice and lush. I will say this, that it was a interesting garden year for our first year there because of the heavy clay soil. And with heavy clay soil came a heck of a lot of squash bugs, like some serious squash bugs this year. And so we had to make sure we take care of that. Then even before that, like the ground itself, the weed control we had to do was, I'll say not weed control, but it was horsetail control. So it was full of horsetail, which was kind of good at the same time, kind of bad. Next slide, please. Hi, little one. Hi. So now it's just the end of it. see, that's our sign, Crosby Gets Again. It's the end of cycle. Things are, you know, going back to nature. We had a successful year. We chose not to be part of their garden market, the farmers market this year. We wanted to see what we could and could not grow in the ground. But next year we are in part of the farmers market. And we're going to hit them hard.
Nice.
Crosby Gets Again, where high growth matters.
Great.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
who would like to go?
Up to you. I could go.
We'll have Sylvia going next.
This
Oh, no.
Maybe I'm not going next.
Oh, there's always gonna be. Okay, well, why don't we go to chair?
Sure.
Yeah.
There's 3 different formats.
Yeah, I'll grab another.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go with chairs.
The normal crowd is used to me fumbling with technology. So. We want that PDF, we're going with this. Okay, can you see the
Can we,
the slideshow?
can you see the slide? No. You can't? Oh, you still have.
Okay, can you see it?
No, not that.
I do see here, there, and everywhere.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I think now it's. Yeah.
How's that? Okay. Good stuff. All right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm Jer Campbell. Yeah, and I own and operate Jer's Garden. So we are a social enterprise dedicated to assisting with food stability and sovereignty in urban spaces, as well as kind of helping to repair a lot of the damage that we've been doing, both through urban activities and through conventional farming. So and that's a great little snapshot there, because on the left, that is a picture. These are pictures from 3 different growing locations, and it kind of encapsulates my model. Starting to say R because fortunately this year it started to grow a little bit and been able to expand and take on some help this year, which has been really exciting. But on the far right there, we have the first place I started started this, which is in just outside of Peterborough. And then these other 2 on the left are, in the middle and the left are small plots, because essentially that's what I do is I take small, generally borrowed spaces, and I'll get a little bit more into the model in a second, but and kind of bring all of that together in order to produce a total farm where I can produce quantities of food. Go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, so what I do is I grow a lot of produce, of course, as we all do as farmers, and sell it. I do some value-added products as well. That's a new endeavor this year, as I kind of started to get all of my food safety in place and collaborate with a community kitchen out Peterborough way to be able to offer products. I distribute free produce, which is ultimately the reason that this started. And we're all about sharing our knowledge and skills around it. As I mentioned, this is a social enterprise. I'm not very concerned with necessarily being an overly successful business. I want to be successful in feeding people and helping people to get feeding themselves back into their hands. So, yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide. And that all comes from the values. So I have grown all of my life, learned subsistence gardening from my grandmother, and that's how we kept our bellies full when I was a kid. And I've always had a passion. I spent 10 years working as an outdoor educator and a wilderness guide, learning the natural sciences, different aspects of that, and deepening my understanding, while always applying that to my gardening, and kind of learning. And as my knowledge expanded around the environmental devastation that we've been that we've been imposing as a larger species, I started to get some ideas together, which really came together during the early days of COVID. I had a lot of time on my hands. I worked a lot with schools, and all of that shut down. I had a lot of time on my hands, and I started thinking, how can I use the knowledge that I have to come up with some new ways of doing things? And as folks were having further and further trouble accessing food, especially fresh, healthy food, and costs were getting higher, I decided to start intensely growing microgreens inside of my apartment. And that was kind of where it started. I figured I could at least start distributing to my neighbors some nutrient intensive food to help supplement what was there. And then I had to start thinking about soil depletion, and went about building a bioreactor out on my balcony, a scaled down version, kind of hybridized things from some things that I'd learned, moved into a little bit of indoor vermiculture. And the next thing I know, I've got all of this soil and more plants than I had space to grow. And as is the way of the farmer. Yeah. And and it just kind of exploded from there. So as soon as the weather turned, so this was all in that first winter. And as soon as the weather turned warm, I started looking towards my neighbors and my friends and the community that I've built. And I noticed in particular that, of course, as we all noticed, it was particular communities suffering the most. I'm a proud member of the larger queer community, and I'm a trans person. And I noticed that in particular, those communities who chronically have high rates of homelessness and food insecurity. And I wanted to really be able to contribute to support that community that always supports me, but also in gratitude for what I'm able to have. So I went to speak to members of my community and my immediate neighbors and started trying to figure out, like, how can we use little pieces? I was able to grow intensely in a closet in my apartment and on my balcony, and by building some quick shelter, and it just really kind of exploded the thoughts around it. And so I developed a model for essentially borrowing garden space, whether existing or I was willing to cut it in residential properties. And I started offering homeowners 10% of the produce that I would produce, and I guarantee that at least 10% of it would go to community mutual aid food projects. And it just kind of exploded from there. A family friend offered me that beautiful space out in Peterborough. So I started planting longer term crops that didn't really need to be fussed with too much, to cut down on transportation and fuel, for both costs and environmental impact. Because it is, so our values are all centered around supporting local and urban agriculture. We need to bring food to our neighborhoods before it gets produce it in our neighborhoods to get it onto our plates. Supporting marginalized communities, and I've been very focused on expanding that focus, continuing to, of course, to center the queer communities, but to other marginalized communities around, with environmentally sustainable practices towards a goal of, I love to grow, but I don't want to have to do this forever. The goal is to put it into people's hands so that we're collaboratively taking care of all of our food needs. Go ahead. So use regenerative practices. You can see my little a segment of my my worm colony there. So they produce mass amounts of nutrient intense castings for me. I use various other regenerative techniques that I could spend hours getting into, but very focused on growing in community. We want to reduce the amount of space from soil to plate to as little as possible, to making sure that it's accessible, because what are we doing if nobody can afford the food that we have? And really focused on that aspect of putting food into people's hands and then showing them how they can grow it for themselves. Kind of try to take some of the mystique away from what it is we do as farmers, because this is something that we have thousands and thousands of years of human history, and it is something that we can all potentially do with a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of care and support from our communities. Go ahead.
Oops.
So there's a shot there of one of the So I also engaged in some agreements with the community garden space this year, which allowed to also all of the produce. And you'll see it there. That's my early radishes coming up. It's a banner year for I got fist-sized radishes with no woodiness. It was just an incredible year. More radishes than anybody knew what to do with. So I was able to engage in that and had enough going otherwise that everything grown in the community gardens there went directly to mutual aid projects, which is how they had some extra plots. Nobody had a couple of extra plots nobody had taken, and generally they wouldn't let somebody who was business minded enter into that, but with a guarantee that everything went out. And it was just absolutely incredible to get to further connect with my community as well while I was there. You can go ahead to the next slide. Got some beautiful amaranths that came up this year. Also a wonderful year for it. So I distribute primarily. So much of my distribution model is in theory, because I found that when I start talking to folks, it becomes really easy with sort of managed prices and just expanding on that network. And it's really been about getting the message out of what I'm trying to accomplish. And the word of mouth response has been incredible. And I haven't had to do, it's like I have plans still that I've had for a while to set up potentially with the Open Food Network and some other distribution mechanisms, but the community support has just been incredible. And none of that's been necessary so far. And I do use a small roadside stand out at the Peterborough location on a kind of an honor pay what you can system. So leave the hardy things out there and let folks take care of and contribute what they can. And I think I got one more there. And I just wanted to finish off by reminding all of us, as we've already been reminded here, that this is Indigenous land. I'm also a settler, and it's very it's very important that when we're, especially when all of the time, but especially when we're working with the land, it's that acknowledgement that my ancestors are from not here is very intrinsic to that awareness of the need to rebuild rebuild the soil here, which I would hope I would do if I had grown up where my ancestors did. But and just to say that I try one of those other values and looking at playing a proper role in community, as I really wish more businesses would do, is to start from that place. This is the Indigenous land, and we grow on because we're spread out from Brampton to Peterborough and all places in between. We grow on many different people's land and have obligations and responsibilities under a number of different treaties. And to speak to one of the original inspirations for this work was an interpretation that I had of the dish with one spoon some years ago, which was boiled down for me at least in part to say that there's enough here for all of us. So it's all of our responsibility to make sure that all of us have enough. And that was really, that conversation was really what started me thinking about the possibility of doing something like this. And so not only do I have obligations and responsibilities, but deep gratitude for that. And wanted to make sure to acknowledge that extensively today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna give this.
And now we have Sylvia, hopefully it works this time.
Oh, look at this.
Oh, wow.
Can
I
you
think
try
it's
one of the other ones?
Okay.
Not the ones with. See
So-
further
Oh, down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
further down. Those ones look like they
No.
haven't been downloaded. Keep going.
No, not that
Not
one.
that one.
Not the one that starts with a period.
Okay.
It's like
yeah.
second from the bottom, maybe.
That
This
one. Yeah. Oh, you have to click. Yeah.
Rid of that.
The third from the bottom. Okay, that one.
Oh,
worked.
it worked.
This one might work. Ta-da!
Yay. All right.
Okay, oh, hang on, I gotta make sure that this is sharing. Everyone can see this. We want that. Okay, can everybody see? Looks like, okay.
Hi,
Okay.
everyone. So my name is Sylvia Cheng and I go by she, her. And I founded Growing to Toronto.
I'm sorry?
Minimize the participation.
I founded Growing to Toronto 2 years ago, and we are a urban flower farm. It's a for-profit company, so it's slightly different from what you've heard before. I'll go into a little bit more in the next slide.
I'm just gonna ask if everybody online can hear.
Oh.
Are you okay?
Can everyone hear?
No one's complaining they can't hear?
So I come from an art and design background. Yeah. Okay. So I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts and a Master of Design. And where I came into this farming industry is really the intersection of being able to create something beautiful through the land and also contribute in a meaningful way through social justice. So this is a sense of why flowers. In terms of the footprint of food, people have a pretty good understanding that imported food is bad, but the sort of flower picture is very, I'd say, like swept under the rug because everyone looks at the beauty of flowers and disregards where it comes from. And so in terms of the scale of the problem, if you look at an average UK person, I couldn't find North America data. An average UK person produces 13.5 tons of CO2 emissions in an entire year. But if this person was to go to the grocery store, where people typically get their bouquets these days, 1 bouquet per week for a year, that is equivalent to 1.5 tons of CO2 emissions. So that is a huge fraction. That's 1/10 of their total annual output. So it's a pretty staggering number that people are just completely disregarding. Go to the next slide. And so this one is relevant to North America. Even though we are on very abundant land that is able to produce, 80% of all the flowers used day in and day out in North America are actually imported. And with flowers, it's imported through a cold chain to be able to preserve its freshness. And so just imagine a stem of rose being harvested in Ecuador that's being consolidated and shipped to Holland for auction. And then from Holland, it then makes its way back to Miami or Los Angeles and then gets redistributed to a local hub, say Mississauga, and then goes to the local florist. That's many steps in the cold chain that people don't understand the impacts of. And so that's where Growing Toronto comes in. We are hyper local in that all of what we use is 100% Ontario grown. It's currently holiday season. Everybody loves to have wreaths and other winter greenery. The local wholesaler uses exclusively imported greenery. So, well, when I say imported, I mean not local. It comes from BC, it comes from Florida. There's none from Ontario that is being supplied to the Ontario florists. We are a micro grower. We grow on residential yards, and we're really careful in acknowledging that we are on Indigenous land, and so they're land partners. And we also forage responsibly because there's a lot of invasive species that can sort of make its way into the floristry field with little regard to how they can spread. In terms of our growing practices, we try as much as possible to practice regenerative farming principles. One crop we grow is dahlias, which does sort of disturb the soil. We do our best to replenish through yearly amendments of generous amounts of worm castings. We always put our beds to sleep with inches of leaf mulch that gets gathered and dumped in landfill. And of course, no artificial fertilizers and pesticides. And currently we grow over 150 cultivars of specialty cut flowers for not only our studio, but other local florists that we sell wholesale to. So in terms of how this business works, we, as farmers, you understand that land access is the main barrier to actually starting a farm business. And so we are partnering with different residential yards. Last year we had 14, this year we're at 8, and because we had a baby. And so we're ramping back up. We just added 2 more at the end of the season. In terms of employment, we do priority hirings through in the BIPOC, queer, and/or neurodiverse community. Obviously sustainable growing practices, and there's a lot of florists who are really silent about all the injustices in the world because they feel it will sort of dilute their business and sort of offend some potential customers. For us, it's really essential that that is the core of our business. When we have a platform, it is our responsibility to use that, to share. And so this is a picture of a field of snapdragons growing on somebody's yard. And in the background are dahlias waiting to come in. And so talk a little bit about numbers. These are actuals based on our 2022 season. So there was a lot of flowers flying around. Not literally flying because they were. So tons of local blooms and foliage sold, about 50,000, rough count. And in addition to what we don't grow, we source locally through the local flower collective and the Ontario Flower Growers Co-op. And so that puts money directly back in the local growing community. And it allows them to sort of compete with imported goods. And then we're also able to divert carbon emissions through our practice of using locally sourced products as well as composting and other means. Yeah. And our language is sustainable urban floristry. So you'll see like graffiti and sewer grates make its way into our language. Next. In terms of planning, so to give you a sense of our timeline, we're in the business of building soil. And so every single year there's amending of that. There's also learning through the craft of planting. There's crop failures. I can talk a lot about that, but there's also successes. And so in this year, we're scaling up production with bulbs and perennials. So bulbs is a way of allowing folks to grow in their own yard, right? Instead of buying flowers, you can go into your yard and cut flowers. And then in the future, I hope to be able to offer like unique value-added products as well as event florals and specialty workshops. Thank you. And that's how you find us.